Good morning. I'd like to call the MPO board to order. And everyone please stand for the pledge and the invocation. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our gracious and heavenly Father, we're so thankful that you allow us to come out today to do the work on behalf of this county. Father, we ask that you be with us as we make decisions to make this county a better place for all of us to live, work, and play. We ask that you regulate our minds and humble our hearts as we make these decisions. We ask you to put your loving arms of protection around those first responders that put their lives on the line for us each and every day, whether they're on foreign soil in military uniforms or here in our community, be police officers, sheriff, or firefighters, or whatever the case may be, taken back to their homes and find everything safe and sound. When our work is done today, Father, we ask you to take us back to our homes and find everything safe and sound. These are all blessed we ask in your righteous and holy name. Amen. First, we have the approval of the January 10th meeting.
So moved.
Motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
No second to approve the January 10th meeting.
I had the motion.
Motion by Councilman Escalco. Who seconded? That's Councilman Cohen. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor let them know by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Motion is adopted. Committee reports, online comments. Ms. Torres.
Morning. Good morning, MPO board members. Your committees approved and forwarded to you today the LRTP amendment for the I-275 operational improvements and Howard Franklin Bridge, the TIP amendment for the I-4 resurfacing, and the safety performance measure and target setting. Those are two different ones. Those are on your agendas today. The committees did agree with establishing a baseline for safety measures, but hope to see the target move lower as we move forward with Vision Zero and other safety projects. In addition, the Policy Committee approved the General Planning Consultant Amendment for Kittleson and the MPO Chairs Coordinating Committee Interlocal Agreement update. They also discussed the annual evaluation of the Executive Director, the upcoming TMA Leadership Group meeting, and including the cost effectiveness of the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan, opportunities for transit-oriented development, and implications for HART and PSTA operations, as well as local government financial commitments. The CAC passed an additional motion expressing concern about the lack of transparency in the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan and requesting a presentation from HART and their consultant at the next CAC meeting. They also recommended that the MPO send a letter to Catherine Egan thanking her for her service to HART and Hillsborough County during their election of officers and seat review attendance for their past year. They vacated the seats for the Expressway Authority and the Transportation Disadvantage Coordinating Board until those agencies are able to send someone to fill that position. The Livable Roadways Committee approved a motion to request the MPO send a letter of opposition to the dockless bicycle sharing bill. I think Beth might bring that up during the executive summary report. They also reviewed attendance for the past year and vacated the seat for Temple Terrace. The TAC, several other committees held elections of officers. The Technical Advisory Committee will be the chair will be Jeff Sims, Mike Williams, Vice Chair, Amber Dickerson, Officer at Large. The Intelligent Transportation Systems Committee will have Vic Bede continuing as chair, Mike Flick as vice chair, and Jeff Sims as officer at large. The Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee declared 2 seats, at-large seats vacant, and elected officers Pat Thorpe as chair, Tony Monk as vice chair, Jim Shirk as officer at large. The School Transportation Working Group heard presentations on the City of Tampa's school-related projects, data-driven approach to crime from the law enforcement, and on the Sulphur Springs Safe Routes to Schools grant application. Lots of other presentations were heard by the committees. They were excellent. I won't go through those. The TBARTA MPO directors reviewed arrangements for the Gulf Coast Safe Streets Summit and the draft of regional tasks to be included in this spring's update of the MPO's Unified Planning work programs. That was your committee reports, and I'll go ahead and just share the online comments from the public. And the public and everyone here should realize that the full comments are in your folders. I only highlight some of them, but I don't want anyone to think that their full comments aren't being received by you. There was a few emails. Bradley Lahora is opposed to the ramps for Howard Franklin Express lanes to be included as the interim improvements. Dale Tyndall sent 3 emails concerned about bottlenecks on I-275 in West Shore. Mauricio Rosas would like the neighborhood reunification to be to be addressed in the regional transit feasibility plan. Robert Sawalish sent 2 emails concerned about the entrance to the VA hospital and thinks that there needs to be some signals, crosswalks, lighting, and turn lanes added. Tom Rask sent 3 emails kind of back and forth with Beth and her replies to him on the regional transit feasibility plan, concerned that funding sources are needed. He supports revisiting the post-referendum analysis or doing that kind of analysis again, and emphasized that there's a lot of public mistrust. Tim Horst was an MPO intern. He got his engineering degree, but he had sent a letter of concern or interest on the regional transit feasibility plan. He liked the cost and the time to build it, and running on Tampa and Florida and dedicated right-of-way, but he disliked or thought that, well, I guess he disliked it, that stations in the middle of the interstate would seem unpleasant for transit users, and the right-of-way between West Shore and downtown should be preserved for high-speed rail service. So those are your emails. We had 3 Facebook comments. I'm almost done. Their Facebook comments were from Jason Ball, and I better put my glasses on. Sorry about this. Smaller print here. Oh, look at that. I can see all forms of highway bus service underperforms real mass transit. Amanda Brown thought that the addition of the express lanes on that interim improvement was a bit premature. She thought it was needed, but that they're still in the middle of the TB Next process. She also had concerns about the regional transit feasibility express bus project as a watered-down version of true BRT. And lastly, Doug Jessup wrote to you all about the TB Next, that he felt that the express toll lanes were the only options being discussed, that they won't ease congestion, they're too expensive, they won't bring economic benefit, that expanding 275 and I-4 doubles down on a racist legacy. And he added that the bus rapid transit, rather than fixed guideway, offers nothing meaningful in way of regional transit. And that Tampa Bay has a sprawl problem, not a traffic problem. So those were your synopsis of your public comments, and that would stand to the report.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to close our regular meeting and move into our public hearing, open the public hearing. Any objection? No objection, very good. We're going to have the public hearing on Land Range Transportation Plan Amendment for I-275 operational improvements at Howard Franklin Bridge. Good morning, Mr. Clarendon.
Morning, board members. Rich Clarendon with the MPO staff. Talking to you today about a proposed amendment to your 2040 Long-Range Transportation Plan. This is the plan that was adopted several years ago. We don't do a whole lot of amending of long-range plans, certainly not with the same frequency that we do with the Transportation Improvement Program, but in this case, we are proposing to add or modify a project because the DOT has some funding to accelerate some improvements in the West Shore area. These are related to the Howard Franklin Bridge replacement. The department is proposing to rebuild the existing northbound bridge in 2020. So that's coming up fairly shortly. This is the bridge that is over 50 years old at this point. The proposed new bridge will have a number of features, including express lanes to accommodate express bus service, better accommodate the possibility of future guideway transit, prepare for autonomous vehicles, handle anticipated future demand, be cost effective, and provide for a bicycle and pedestrian facility. The bridge itself is not part of our plan for one main reason, and that is that it's actually in the Pinellas Long-Range Transportation Plan and Transportation Improvement Program. However, there are some elements that we need to take into consideration, mainly ramps getting to and from the express lanes. So this is just a rendering that shows the configuration of the new bridge, showing the express lanes in purple in the middle there and the general purpose lanes in blue to each side, and then a bicycle pedestrian facility in green. So this is a graphic, not to scale, that shows generally what the department is proposing. The upper half is what are considered operational improvements. Actually, we don't need a long-range plan amendment for that. However, it is important to recognize that this is coming up fairly soon, scheduled for 2019 and 2020. In yellow there, you can see some additional laneage that's proposed basically to alleviate the bottleneck that's created where you have 4 lanes squeezed down to 2 to get under an overpass. So this will add some additional lanes in that segment around the West Shore and State Road 60 interchange. The bottom half shows the Howard Franklin Bridge project and how that impacts Hillsborough County on our side of the bridge. The green lanes show what are called express lane transitions. You can kind of think of them as on and off ramps getting to and from proposed express lanes. And that's the subject of our amendment because those are not currently in your long-range plan. This just shows the way the project is described presently in your long-range plan in the middle column there, and then as amended. So essentially what's changing are the limits, the description from the it describes specifically the 8 lanes of general purpose lanes and 4 express lanes. The cost is significantly less. So this is where I think DOT is trying to use dollars that are available to alleviate a bottleneck in the short term. And the funding source, strategic intermodal systems dollars, these are allocated at a statewide level, state dollars. So our recommended action is to approve the amendment to the long-range plan to include the express lane ramps as described. I would point out, as Gina just mentioned, your technical and Citizens Advisory Committee did review this project and recommended it to you. The CAC was specifically interested in the description of the express lanes, whether they be tolled or not. And I have confirmed with DOT that the intention is that those will be toll lanes. So with any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Clarendon. We're going to move into public comment. I have one speaker card for public comment, Karen Mikowski. You have 3 minutes. Good morning.
Do I say my address?
No.
Karen Mahalski. I'm opposed to the express lanes. I think the express lanes aren't going to solve congestion. There's 3 lanes coming over. Currently we have, I believe, 4 lanes. Also, express lanes are going to be for someone who's going to be pay. The biggest concern that I have is what happens if there is an accident on the express lanes? How are first responders going to get to it? Are there going to be cement barricade for the 2 lanes? Are you going to have delimiters? The plastic delimiters, are you going to be going on and off and someone having to literally break through either for first responders or because there's congestion in the express lanes and you want to escape it? I believe this has already been happening in the Miami-Dade area, and I think it's of great concern if there is a mass accident on the Howard Franklin. Thank you so much.
Okay, that was the only speaker's card that I had at this point in time. Anyone else wishing to address the issue? Come on forward, please, ma'am. And when you're done, I need you to fill out a card. Do you have one in your hand? Okay.
Do you fill out multiple cards for different times to speak for public comment, or is this the only time for public comment?
On this particular issue.
On this, okay. So I have more than one issue. On this particular issue, I just wanted to address.
State your name.
I'm sorry, my name is Josephine Amato. I am a resident in Hillsborough County, Florida. Do you need anything else?
No, that's
Okay, thank you. I started a grassroots movement, Safe Bus for Us, with the safest paths to school in Hillsborough County, Florida. And what I wanted to address is it seems like a phenomenal plan. I'm glad everyone's moving in the right direction, but the bicycle and the pedestrian path should be separate. Because if we're only and how large is that path specifically? When you walk 2 individuals next to a bicycle, next to the highway, it pushes people into the roadways. And in Hillsborough County, we have the highest pedestrian death rate in the state of Florida per capita. We have the 2nd highest pedestrian death rate in our nation. We are great at killing our pedestrians. Last year alone, we lost 5,788 pedestrians. that is close to the number of people we have lost to drunk drivers in America. We can do better. And so one of the plannings that I know in Vision Zero and the ways where we are going, is to create better plans and not have dangerous designs. And this is a great design, but can we look at the separating the bike pathway and the pedestrian pathway? And I know that costs money, but if we can scooch it a little and protect our pedestrians and our cyclists, we can really save lives. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am, hold on. I didn't get your last name. What's your last name again?
It is Amato, A-M-A-T-O.
Okay, Ms. Motto, Commissioner White has a question for you.
Absolutely.
Good morning, Ms. Amato. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Well, do you mind if I state for the record the general community in which you live? Would you be comfortable
Absolutely.
with that? Okay. Miss Amato lives out in the Fishhawk community, and as we all know, they've been hit especially hard with this elimination of courtesy busing by the school board. So I know we don't fund projects here, so I know ultimately, because it's an unincorporated Hillsborough County, this will rest with county staff. So I would just ask Ms. Halden that you really, take what's been stated here to heart and work with county staff to see if we can develop something that would accomplish the bicyclist and pedestrian safety points that have been brought up by Ms. Amato.
Remember, we're in public comment, folks. Commissioner Merriman, you ready?
Yes, Ms. Amato, and thank you for coming. This year, for the session in Tallahassee, from the county, we requested $2 million for sidewalks and other amenities to help because of the courtesy busing. And it is in the House and the Senate budgets. So if you'll contact my office, I'll tell you who to get a hold of so you can send letters of support to help on this issue.
Absolutely. And I'm going to speak in the different part of the public comment that's not on this issue about our school transportation working group and our pedestrian safety and our children at a later time, but I absolutely will. And thank you for reaching out to us and trying to save lives. Thank you.
Ms. Amato, give your card on this subject to Ms. West, and you say you want to speak again during public comment?
I absolutely do.
I need
Yes.
another card from you.
Absolutely. I'll go get one. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Anyone else wishing to address the public comment in this public hearing? Anyone else? Seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing for board discussion. Commissioner Kemp, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like, as we move along and keep looking at these toll lanes as that I inevitably seem to be being brought forward, I want to make other board members aware of some of the situations around the nation. And in December, in Northern Virginia, the Washington, D.C. area, they opened up a 10-mile toll lane. On the very first day, they had extreme protests about it. It went up to $46.75 for 10 miles to go 45 miles an hour. At another time, it rose to actually $84, but the average has been $34 each way for 10 miles of going 45 miles an hour. So in other words, something like $70 to $90 a day for the 10 miles of going 35 miles an hour. And there's a lot of people have shown up at the Virginia legislature, and I have no doubt that it will become a larger issue there, as it has in many other communities. They can't lower the tolls because otherwise the roads will fill up, and then they don't achieve the other goal. So I just want to make everyone aware of this tolling situation.
Any other board comment? Yes, Mr. Green, Dr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a general question. The question that Ms. Motto brought up about the width of the bike and pedestrian.
Want to ask staff? You say you have a question of staff?
Yes, about the width of the bike and pedestrian lane.
Who can answer that question, Mr. Claren or someone from FDOT?
I think I'd probably defer to FDOT on this.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Chairman and board members. The lane is, it's going to be a 12-foot pedestrian facility. I'm sorry, Bill Jones with FDOT and Director of Transportation Development. It's going to be a 12-foot facility, and it's going to have, we're looking right now at potential bulb outs at certain points along the bridge. It will be barrier separated as well, to Ms. Amato's question there. So it will be concrete separated, barrier separated from the travel lanes. And then once you get across the actual structure itself, once you get to the land side on each side, it will be separated as well. We just have to work out the details with the Pinellas and Hillsborough County on how we want to move forward with that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Board, the staff has recommended that we approve amending the 2040 long-range transportation plan to include the express lane ramps as described. What's your pleasure?
Move approval.
There's a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. There's further discussion. Seeing none, roll call vote. Second by Mayor Jurado. Roll call vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Cohen?
Yes.
Green?
Yes.
Hagan?
Yes.
Opana?
Yes.
Lott?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Garrett?
Yes.
Merman?
Yes.
Maniscalco?
Yes.
Wagner?
Yes.
White?
Yes.
Stewart? Motion carried.
Thank you. So we'll now close the public hearing and move back into a regular meeting. Public comment on non-public hearing items. I have 3 cards. The first one is Taryn Sabia. Morning.
Good morning, Taryn Sabia.
Sabia.
I wanted to speak to the Regional Transportation Feasibility Study. I know some of you heard me speak yesterday morning at the HART Board meeting, but there's a few things that I wanted to address as you move forward and watch the presentations. And the first is about vision and making sure that we're clear that as we move forward with transportation, that we really are meeting a community's vision, our community's vision, and that we also address the goals that are reflected in Imagine 2040. The Imagine 2040 plan does set out quite a number of goals and strategies addressing the challenges that we face, and we want to make sure that transportation doesn't just meet federal regulations in order for funding, but that we are actually addressing those goals as we approach for those dollars. Sometimes it seems that we look at those federal regulations and initial costs and we put that first and we start there as opposed to starting with the goals and visions that we need to address. And so I would urge that as we look at the STOPS initiative, and you'll hear more about that in terms of the way in which we have to report what we're asking for to the federal government, that we don't use that as our starting point, but rather we look at the land use and economic development studies that are so necessary to accompany a transportation plan. Right now, we're lacking those. We are not looking at how our land use is going to be impacted or the potential for economic development. So when we look at overall cost, we have to look at that economic development potential that could be gained through transit-oriented development so that we can direct our growth to go to the areas that we want to see it and protect our rural areas from that growth in the future. And there's a great example. Cleveland has one of the highest rated BRTs in the nation, and what we're seeing from that BRT, which is located on an avenue, is that over its 13-mile stretch, it was put in place with under $200 million, and it has generated over $6.3 billion in economic development. So that increase in tax base is something that we should really be looking at as we move forward to make the best choice we can for connecting our business centers, our residents, and all of the assets that we have around our community.
Excuse me, we have a question
Yes.
from Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you for coming down this morning, Taryn. I think Taryn Sabia is a gift to our community for her insight and what she brings about looking at the way that land use and development and economic development and our transportation intersects. And I do think that that has been, in fact, it's a totally absent category from our long-range or the transportation feasibility, transit feasibility plan. One of the things that I find, and I've seen a bevy of information around the country on it, is the difference between locating BRT at street level and BRT on top of an elevated expressway, and the way that that should be done. It doesn't make sense to me to have all kinds of multiple stops at the expressway. You neither get the speed nor what you need. I'd like to see express buses doing that and stops in communities. But could you speak to kind of the difference in terms of creating economic development? And you did speak a bit with the health line, which is at street level, the difference between the elevated and a BRT system that's at street level.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, let me remind you, we're in public comment. You recognize, ma'am.
So what you'll see with BRT is that True BRT has a dedicated right-of-way. Those that are ranked as being in a silver gold standard, which we don't have here in the U.S., really look at being able to function similar to a light rail or a modern streetcar system. So they function best at grade, where people can walk from their neighborhoods to those station areas. BRT stations are typically placed a quarter mile to 2 miles apart from each other, depending on where they are, and whether they're linking larger districts or neighborhood to neighborhood within more urban areas. So the stops are closer in the urban areas, further apart as you get outside of those urban areas. One of the key pieces is that 5-minute walk that we're all comfortable taking to get to any place, especially a transit stop. And that's really where we're going to start generating those values of economic development, are around those transit stops that should be located within neighborhoods, so that within that quarter-mile radius or half-mile radius, we're seeing that transit-oriented development really take shape, and that's where we're going to get that economic development boost and increase in tax base.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Next speaker is Karen Mikulski.
Yes, I just want to bring this to your attention. I believe you have it in your legislation packet in today's information. As the lady mentioned, it was about the buses. There is the no buses for, I believe, 2 miles. Legislation is going to be they have a Senate bill and a House bill that would require, if a parent thought that they had hazardous conditions for walking, the superintendent is required to evaluate and then provide transportation. This is going to be a huge burden on our school board if more buses are going to be needed. I think this really needs to be addressed. We don't have walkable city. We don't have sidewalks. Development doesn't pay for sidewalks. I think this is a huge, as she mentioned, the amount of pedestrians and children that are potentially at dangerous, and that this is going to be a huge burden on our school system. Thank you.
Josephine Amato.
Hi, my name is Josephine Amato. I'm a resident of Hillsborough County, Florida, in Lithia, Florida. I am also a wife to a recently retired veteran. He served 30 years in special operations, and we retired out of MacDill, making this our forever home. And I began getting involved with school buses when my children were injured on overcrowded buses. So I started a grassroots movement when the school board eliminated 7,500 students from receiving safe school buses to school. And why I'm addressing you today is our Student Transportation Working Group Committee is headed by a school board member chair. And that chair is running a school district agenda. Over the last year, I have collected data which I know most Americans don't know, but the National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration has collected data for 20 years establishing that our school buses are the safest mode of transportation to school. And I'm gonna bring that alive to you. In 2016, we lost 5,788 pedestrians. In 2016, we lost 9 individuals, Americans, on a school bus. The American school bus literally saves children's lives. When you place your child in a car seat and you transport them to school, they are 70% safer than without that car seat. When you place your child in a school bus, they are in a tank. They are 7,000% safer than any other mode of travel to school. They're literally in a tank to school. If I live 10 miles or 1 mile from a school, I pay the same taxes. It is a public bus to public school traversing over publicly created hazards. So 90% of the children who have been killed walking to school over the last 5 years in Hillsborough County have been Hispanic American students. Why? Because the distribution of the asset of the school bus has been disparately distributed amongst our district. I have the stats. 100% of our Title I schools lost safe school bus transportation to school. 100% of our schools with the racial student demographic of 50 or 70% minority students lost safe school bus transportation to school. Our school bus transportation working group committee has zero conversation, including the school bus. This committee is federally funded by Safe Routes to School. Safe Routes to School is about what is the safest way we can get our children to school. And if the American school bus is not part of that conversation and the chair is running the school board agenda, then we have a problem. There's one parent on that committee. We have 200,000 students. Why don't we have at least one rep from every PTA board? Why don't we have a socioeconomic diverse parent representation? Why don't we have more voices not running a school board agenda? If your goal is to create safe routes, do it in a better way. Thank you.
Hold on, Ms. Marto. We have a question. Commissioner White.
Absolutely.
You recognize.
I think Commissioner Merman has a question as well. I'll keep this very brief. Forgive me, I walked in a moment late and I was a little off topic the last time Ms. Amato spoke. But first of all, I wholeheartedly agree. I've been very vocal in the fact that I think eliminating courtesy busing was just the wrong decision. Getting back, though, to the pedestrian and bicycle pathways that I mentioned earlier, I know the county has talked about, and not necessarily in the context of the whether or not courtesy busing should remain off the table. But I know that county staff has talked about enhancing bicycle and pedestrian pathways in the Fishhawk community. So I think to the extent that the MPO staff can engage, that would be a great opportunity to talk about the safety issues. But ditto. I mean, I totally agree on the issue with getting kids to school on buses.
Mr. Merman, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just asked Beth Alden if we could add some more parents to this committee, to our Transportation Work Group Committee. And she will, I guess, talk to whoever at the school board to get that set up. But I do think we need to have more parents on that Transportation Work Group. You'd be, of course, a great member to add. But I am, I got to tell you, when I was driving down to see how bad the problem was in South County and saw students walking on the shoulder of Big Bend Road, and you all know Big Bend Road, probably the worst place you could walk anytime. And there are no sidewalks. We know the problem goes back to when the legislature did away with the impact fees and the developers didn't have to put these amenities in, which again puts the onus back on the county to make sure. And we want to do everything we can to keep people safe. But then the school board does away with courtesy busing. Problem comes back on the county to keep people safe and keep going. So I think we're at a serious crossroads here, and I want to make sure our parents' voices are being heard.
And I want to be clear, so I'm glad you brought up Big Bend Road, that Florida Statute 1006.23 that defines hazardous walking conditions have clearly been met at all 66 schools along all 7,500 routes. Big Bend Road, Eisenhower Middle School, East Bay High School, where a lot of military families live. Mm-hmm. I was just at MacDill yesterday speaking with the command over there over this issue. Clearly meets the definition of hazardous walking conditions. Right. The school district is choosing not to follow the law, and there's no one above them to stop them. And if we're going to have a school transportation working group run by a school board member running their own agenda, we have an issue problem. So we need more voices, and we need a chair that's bipartisan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Again, we're in public comment, folks.
Okay.
Public comment, okay? Commissioner Kemp, briefly, with this, I'm going to ask staff to bring this back to the public, to the policy group, but briefly, Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond and thank you for coming down and having being so clear about the importance of this issue. There is a role, of course, I think, on mobility fees, and I have been a big advocate of the county doing the things like the sidewalks, pedestrian walkways, trails, but I also, think that there is a huge issue with our legislature not funding busing and having a limit of $40 million. And I think that that is the place to look at. That should at least, for them to have a 2-mile rule for kids, and you bring it up so well that this is it's like being in an armored tank practically to put your kids on a bus. And in the state, I think, has a responsibility in this regard to double, triple, whatever it takes, so that kids have, I can't even imagine in these urban areas them walking the 2 miles or in any place to get to school actually in the mornings. It seems like that should be cut down and that there should be a significant state investment to be had in getting kids in school buses and safely to school.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, thank you so much for your time.
Is there anyone else wishing to address us at this particular point in time? Let me say this. Members, if there is a subject that you want brought forth on the agenda, please let our executive director know. Public comment is just what that is, public comment. It's not supposed to be a debate on issues. If you have an issue with if you have any particular item that you want to have brought up, get with Miss Alden, and she will put it on the agenda, because again, public comment is just that, public comment. It is not for debate or discussion on the issue that a person brings up, okay? Consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Commissioner Berman, second by Councilman Cohen to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Likewise, motion is adopted. Next item is a roll call vote on the Transportation Improvement Program amendment for I-4 resurfacing. Is there any discussion on that particular item? Any discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilman Maniscalco, second by Commissioner Merman to approve for Transportation Improvement Program Amendment for I-4 resurfacing. Roll call vote.
Luke Anderson.
Yes.
Kemp.
Yes.
Mechanic. Corrado.
Yes.
Cohen.
Yes.
Green.
Yes.
Kagan.
Yes.
Romano.
Yes.
Lott.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Fiore.
Yes.
Merman.
Yes.
Maniscalco.
Yes.
Wagner.
Yes.
White.
Yes.
Stewart. Motion carried.
Thank you. Moves to action items, Transportation Improvement Program Amendment for Performance Measures, Targeted Settings, Safety. Mr. Wong?
Good morning, board members. I'm Johnny Wong, Hillsborough MPO staff. I manage our performance measures program, and this morning I'm going to brief you about MAP 21 safety performance measures and our target setting process. So we have periodically brought you information about the development of MAP 21. This legislation established 7 national goals related to transportation performance, and it requires state DOTs and MPOs to track and record several performance measures related to each one of those national goals. The one that we're dealing with here today is the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which deals with safety across our county, and it requires us to track number of fatalities, number of serious injuries, number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries combined, and then 2 rates. One is the fatality rate per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, and the second is serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. So the Federal Highway Administration released the safety rule a little over a year ago. On this slide, you see a timeline which describes the process and schedule for setting targets. By August 31 of 2017, FDOT was required to submit its statewide targets. They did, and they declared a target for each one of those 5 performance measures. 180 days later, we are required to establish our targets for the county. And on an annual basis, the Federal Highway Administration is going to review the performance of the state, and that will be an ongoing process. Beginning in December of 2019, they're going to make a determination as to whether or not the state has made significant progress toward meeting those targets. So at the August 2017 MPO Advisory Council meeting, FDOT declared that all 5 of those performance measures for the state are going to be 0. But because there's a lot of complication about setting a target of 0 for funding purposes, the state developed what they're calling interim performance measures, which basically tracks the trend using historical data, and they predict that for calendar year 2018, the state will have a little over 3,000 fatalities, just under 21,000 serious injuries, a fatality rate of 1.65, a serious injury rate of 11.06, and just under 3,500 bike and ped fatalities. The Federal Highway Administration established guidance for us to set targets, especially related to this initial baseline performance report. They discourage aspirational targets of 0, and what they're requesting of us is to establish data-driven, realistic targets. There's also no penalty for not hitting our targets because we already max out our Highway Safety Improvement Program funds. So using the state's methodology to track and project the performance measures through calendar year 2018, we have done the statistics, and we predict that through the year 2018, we will expect to see 184 fatalities, 1,618 serious injuries, 243 bike and ped fatalities and serious injuries combined, a rate of fatalities per 100 million VMT of 1.4, which is slightly above the statewide average of 1.32, and a rate of serious injuries per 100 million VMT of 12.35, which is pretty significantly above the statewide average of 10.22. This is an action item, and so we are recommending that for this TIP amendment, you allow us to identify a long-term goal of achieving 0 fatalities and serious injuries, but for the initial baseline performance report that will be submitted to the DOT to establish our safety targets as we've discussed. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Herman, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a great report. Thank you very much. I'm glad that they're finally doing this, but it seems like the numbers are pretty high. In comparison to other regions, how do these numbers compare?
I can't tell you exactly how they compare to other specific regions, but these are following a trend of 5 years. So we're required to use 5 years of historical data to project what the trend will be. So this is putting us right on trend of what we've seen for the fatalities and serious injuries between 2012 and 2016. They are high. We have the highest fatality rate among large counties in the nation.
I know, but I'm just worried about creating our baseline that is at such a high level. Maybe Ms.
Alden has some comments.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you so much. And the piece of data in here that I found the most interesting was how many serious crashes and fatalities do we have per the amount of traffic that we have. So that's that 100 million vehicle miles traveled number. And what we're seeing looking at other communities around the country is that that rate is even going up. So we know that traffic is growing. We know that we're going to have more crashes as traffic grows. But when folks are tying this potentially to distracted driving, the actual rate of serious crashes is going up as well. Now, the projection that we've done looking at our trend over the last 5 years, we've actually been able to hold that rate steady of the number of crashes per the amount of traffic. And so we're optimistic that with our continued focus on Vision Zero, we'll at least be able to hold that rate steady. And that includes some of the outreach and education campaigns that we're working on, working with the DOT, to try to focus on issues like distracted driving, making sure that all of us are paying attention and aware of our surroundings.
Mr. Merman, you have any more? Mr. Merman, were you done?
I'm done.
Mr. DePaulo, you recognize.
Yeah, the number that you showed earlier, the 3,000 number, is that the statewide number? And this is the county number?
Across the whole state was a
Okay.
3,000 number, and this is just for Hillsborough, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. White, you recognize.
Thank you, and I'm glad to hear that we've set reasonable metrics along the way in which we can meet. And I'm glad to hear that the state is such a willing partner. Some of this, though, would ultimately rest with the local governments. And believe me, I want, the aspiration of reaching zero more than anyone else, or just as much as anyone else in this room. But how can we be sure that we're not placing an unfunded mandate on the local governments with respect to this process?
Well, I think that the intention of the legislation is to dedicate or to allocate more highway safety funds to states that are underperforming. We're certainly maxed out at the maxed out at the total of funds that we allocate towards safety projects. I can't speak to whether or not this is an unfunded mandate, but we're certainly motivated to do more with the safety dollars that we have. And I think that that's kind of what the spirit of performance-based planning is.
Okay. Of course, I can't speak for the representatives of the municipalities in the room, but I would urge Ms. Alden to work closely with county staff and just assure that, that we all understand what this could equate to operationally for the county.
Sure. And if I could add something on that, if we were to adopt a zero target for calendar year 2018, that would be an unfunded mandate. We would be saying that we are going to get to zero deaths, and we do not have the resources to do that. So we've tried to be reasonable while also being somewhat optimistic that we're going to be able to hold steady on that rate that I mentioned.
Councilman Coyne, you recognize.
Thank you very much. Just picking up where Commissioner White left off, and I think Ms. Alden's comments clarified this a little bit, but I think it's very important that in setting these type of goals, we make it very clear that we're not going to congratulate ourselves and pat ourselves on the back if only 177 people die next year instead of 184. It makes me a little bit uncomfortable to aspire to those kinds of numbers. I understand what Ms. Alden's saying but if we really are committed to zero, I think it's very important that we have some acknowledgement or verbiage in whatever it is we're approving today, that in no way are these numbers acceptable and sustainable in this community. I don't ever want someone to come back and say, how could you possibly think that that's an acceptable outcome?
Mr. Kemp, you recognize.
Thank you. I think most of us are familiar with the fact that Hillsborough County has and repeatedly has the second most pedestrian crash deaths, bicycle deaths in the nation. We keep getting that again and again. The 7 most dangerous jurisdictions in the nation are all in Florida, 7 out of the top 10, which is speaks to some issues that we specifically have here. I thought it was interesting that you talked about vehicle miles traveled. It sounds like one of the ways that we can look at least bringing this down some is having a more robust transit available and buses for kids to be in to be safe, as we've been pointed out this morning. The other thing I wonder about with this, I'm very obviously happy to see this. I wouldn't want it set at zero because I wouldn't think that would be a serious. Obviously, as Commissioner White says, we all want it to be zero, but it wouldn't be chipping away at that. I heard you say that Vision Zero is one of the ways that we go after this. I think transit is another way. But I just wonder, are we going to have a follow-up presentation to learn about exactly how we go about with FDOT and everyone else, like besides Vision Zero, besides transit, what is it that we do design-wise? I've heard leading pedestrian interval lights are really essential to helping this happen. Are we going to have a follow-up on this? How does this proceed?
Great question, and you have asked for a quarterly report on our Vision Zero action plan and what progress we're making, and I think what we can do is add to that what are some key next steps for how do we turn these trends around.
I'd like to also know what the road elements of it are that, are getting the dollars and what kinds of things we're doing at different places in terms of that.
Mr. Green, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I had some similar concerns of both Councilman Cohen and Commissioner Kemp. But at this past month's Livable Roadways Committee meeting, I did express some concerns about these numbers, and I agree with you. It's not an opportunity for us to pat ourselves on the back. But as Ms. Alton mentioned, if we do adopt a zero target, that would introduce, or suggest rather, an unfunded mandate. But my question is, so what is the response? Obviously, there has to be something. I know at the several meetings in the past, Livable Roadways Committee meetings rather, we have asked for some type of number figure in terms of how much we're allocating for safety. And I don't know if there's a good way to disaggregate that from other spending that we're doing, but I'd like to see that type of metric compared with this type of metric.
Okay. Anything else?
That should do it. Thank you.
Adriana.
And just a question of clarification. As we look at these numbers you shared, they have been built off 5-year historical data.
Right.
And so there's 5-year historical data. What percentage of improvement is reflected in those numbers? So as you looked at the 5-year data, then what percentage of improvement is reflected here?
Well, just looking at fatalities for a second, the 5 years of data is required by FHWA in the regulation. So we're required to use 2012 through 2016 data for the initial period, and then moving forward, that'll be a 5-year rolling average. As you can see, in 2016, we had a particularly bad year. That 184 projection is slightly lower because 2014 compared to 2016 was a much better year. As we move forward, those numbers will get a little bit tighter and more dialed in to reflect the actual conditions that we're seeing on the roadways.
So this really is nothing but 5-year averages. It is in no way reflecting any improvement plan. So if we are challenged, as Councilman Cohen said, we're not going to celebrate any deaths, but it's also not reflecting any improvement. We're just showing a 5-year running average. So there's no intentionality on moving the needle. We're just seeing where the needle is on average over 5 years.
Well, that's the purpose of the initial baseline period. This is part of setting the targets is part of a larger nationwide initiative to establish a baseline and then track trends over time. So I think for this first period, it's really important to understand where we are so that we can figure out whether or not we're moving the needle in the future.
Any other discussion? Mr. Wagner.
One suggestion, the Vision Zero, or the zero as a goal, is a good vision, aspirational goal to express these measures and this agency's program as a strategic plan on how we will achieve that might be, address a lot of the concerns you're hearing around the table. Our aspiration is zero. How we get there and how we do it over time as a set of interim goals and objectives, and how we measure that might be a nice way to bring it back. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, what's your pleasure?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kemp, second by Councilman Maniscalco to approve the staff recommendation. Seeing no further discussion, roll call vote? Yes, roll call vote.
Anderson?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Corrado?
Yes.
Cohen?
Yes.
Green?
Yes.
Yes.
Lano? Yes. Lott?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Vieira?
Yes.
Berman?
Yes.
Scalco?
Yes.
Wagner?
Yes.
White?
Yes.
Stewart?
I'll abstain since I don't know what you're voting on yet.
Very
Thank you. Before we move into the status reports, I want to paint a little picture for you here. I've heard the comments today that a lot of people, depending on what happens in the legislature, of getting what we might want here. The legislative process is halfway over. The House will stop meeting in committees probably within the next 14 days. The Senate will probably have their committee meetings going on for probably another 21 days. After that, if you're depending on a bill that hasn't been heard in the House committee or Senate committee, more than likely it's dead. So for those of you who are depending and looking at what bills are going on in the legislature, please pay close attention to where they are. If a bill has about 5 more committee references, DOA, dead on arrival, in either the House or the Senate. And amending bills onto other bills these days up there, someone's going to call a point of order and it won't be going anywhere. So I know a lot of people are tight and nervous about what's happening in Tallahassee, but the time is drawing near. It's an election year, and I can guarantee you, and Commissioner Merriman can attest to this also, that once those committee meetings are over in the House, the Senate's not going to take up probably anything else coming from the House because it's not going to be sending it back over there. So just pay close attention to bills and where they are in the committees of reference because it could very well be doomed. A lot of people get nervous about bills in legislature. Don't do that because they probably will not see the light of day. Okay. Status reports. Tampa Bay next quarterly update.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, board members. David Gwynn, District Secretary, FDOT District 7. I'm here today to give you an update on the Tampa Bay Next process. I'm going to cover 4 areas today. The 4 areas are public engagement. We've been doing a lot of public engagement. I'll update you on what we've learned. Also talk about how we're modifying our approach as we go forward to take into account what we're hearing. Talk a little bit about transit projects and programs, and also give you an update on the interstate program. All right. Try not to get ahead of myself. It's slowing down a little bit. All right. First, we've been doing a lot of public involvement. You've probably heard that we've been out in the community. We've been meeting all over the region, not just in the area, in the downtown area, although we do a lot of meetings in that area. We've been going out to the different counties in the region, getting a lot of input, meeting with different size of groups, folks with different views on what should and shouldn't be done, and we're compiling all that information. We've spent about the last year really through the Tampa Bay Next process to collect that data, and we continue to do so. And we're hoping to be able to build some consensus on where we go as a community, as a region, how we go forward. We have received a lot of comments. About 44% of that comment has come from what we would consider the downtown area, the urban core, with the remaining 56% being spread around the rest of the region. West Shore had about 20%. And we're hearing a wide variety of comments, as you could expect. Some of the things that we're hearing on a more regular basis are, of course, a lot of people want us to address the daily traffic backups, the congestion, the bottlenecks. Those are primarily people that are driving on our roads to get to work and where they need to go. We're hearing a lot about safety, bicycle, pedestrian safety, as well as vehicular safety. We're hearing a lot of local and neighborhood concerns. How do these road projects interrelate with the neighborhoods? How's traffic going to impact them? And then, of course, we're hearing a lot about transit. We're hearing a lot about transit both on the local transit side as well as the regional transit side. I think it's important that we remember that there are 2 distinct parts of the transit discussion, the regional transit and the local transit. We've also gone and taken a new look at how we look at corridors. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Every corridor is different, and the needs and the applications for those corridors are different as well. So the solutions that we've been coming up with and looking to present to the communities has focused on safety, traffic operations, innovation, complete streets, freight access, and transit. And how can we work together and think differently about transportation solutions? Well, what we're doing is we're working very closely with all our partners. We're working with the county, with the cities, with HART, TBARTA, the MPO, of course. And we're looking to go beyond a corridor-specific approach and look at what the needs of the community are and how all this fits together. I won't go into all the things that we're doing, but I would today just I'm going to pick one area that we're working on to give you an idea of the kinds of studies and approaches that we're taking. And the area I'll talk to you about today is the Heights area. We've looked at a lot of information and a lot of input that we've received from the community. Of course, we have the Tampa Interstate study that's involved down there, the SEIS. We've slowed that down. We've slowed that down so that we could have the other studies have time to catch up, so we're not getting ahead with our interstate solutions. And what we're trying to do, and I think we're making a lot of headway on, is looking at ways to minimize or even eliminate some of the impacts to the community of those projects. We're also looking at how do we complement redevelopment activity that is occurring in that area. We're also looking at how it ties seamlessly into the local street network, the bike and walk community, and also the transit system. The I-275 North Project Development and Environmental Study, which is different than the SEIS. This picks up on the north side of the SEIS on 275. And it's probably the area that we've gotten the widest range of feedback. A lot of people want us to just widen it out and provide more lanes. Other people want us to tear it down and build a boulevard. So we've heard the broad spectrum of the types of opinions that you would expect. And a lot of people also want to look at things more immediately, like the I-4 ramp that goes from southbound 275 to eastbound I-4. How do we try to improve that without waiting as long as we do for the other improvements? What we're doing now is we're working with the community, looking at options and trying to find what we can do in the near term to address both safety and operational concerns, because there are a lot of safety and operational concerns in that corridor right now. Also, we wanted to talk a little bit about the regional transit plan. I'm not going to spend a ton of time today on that because you're going to get a separate presentation on it. But as you know, FDOT is the funding partner for the transit study, and that has moved forward as far as a vision as well as a catalyst project. And we stand ready to work with whatever that catalyst project is that goes forward. As you know, we have $5 million set aside for a project development and environmental study that'll be done on the catalyst project. We're waiting to hear from TBARDA and the TMA as far as what that project will be, and at that time, we'll work to get the funding for that project. But it's not just that. We've also looked at a lot of other funding opportunities. We funded the Tampa streetcar extension study. We know that's an integral part. It's not necessarily a regional transit solution, but it is something that's important. And so DOT has been involved in funding that study, and will continue to work with the partners on that. We've also, for the Heights mobility study.
Can I just ask you a question about the streetcar study? You said it's not a regional transportation solution, but if it intersected with the BRT proposal at a shared station, wouldn't that provide some regional connectivity to downtown Tampa?
It would be part of a regional system. Now, all the transit in the region would ultimately become part of the regional system. But typically, when you talk about a regional transit, you're talking about getting more than just to within an area of a downtown, for instance. You're looking at perhaps getting from a Wesley Chapel area all the way down to downtown, and downtown out to Pinellas County. That's typically your spine, your regional study, and the other parts fit into it. But we did bring the money to study that, so we certainly recognize that's an important part of the system. Okay. The next one is the Heights Mobility Plan. Our folks have spent a lot of time out in the community, walking around the community, looking with the community at things that we can do. Some of them are short-term items that we've already started to implement. But we've also got some bigger ideas for the Florida Avenue corridor, and we'll continue to work with the community and implement those through our work program. Now, also, we've been looking up at the university area, and how do we link the university area to downtown, because we know that's an area that we have heard there's a big demand for. We're currently doing a study up there that'll last over the next year, and that study is going to help us to figure out not only how do we move within that corridor of that area, but also how do we connect it to Florida, and how do we ultimately get that to get to downtown. Now, a project that hasn't started yet, but that DOT has provided $2.5 million for is the BRT corridor analysis for Florida and for Fowler. We have $2.5 million, and we've agreed to spend that on a study to look at, can we put BRT down the Florida-Tampa corridor, tie that into Fowler, and bring it across to University. And I've heard some talks about station locations and all today. One thing I would remember as you're looking at all these studies and how they're not independent. They're not either, they're not either or, they're not in a vacuum. For instance, on the regional study, you'll see that I think with the exception of 2 of the 21 stations are at street level. There's also stations that could be connected over to this BRT on Florida Avenue. It could be one station that's connected the 2 systems together. So it's not a, do we put it on Florida Avenue or do we put it on the interstate, or do we, what? It's all being looked at as part of a system, not as individual. You can't have one if you have the other types of projects. But there is $2.5 million to take that project. And part of that project, I heard about some economic studies. Typically, when you look at economic analysis, you look at that during the preliminary engineering, the PD&E phase, which would be the next stage of the Catalyst project. But on this project, with the $2.5 million that we have, it includes the PD&E study, which includes the economic analysis that would look at things like transit-oriented development, those types of things. So DOT is certainly funding some of that. That money is available now, and I think they're moving forward with how to get somebody on board to do that study. So hopefully these plans, and I went over actually 7 of them there, will give you an idea of the fresh look we are taking at looking at transportation planning and solutions. We'll continue to come back and present updates as these projects move forward. I also wanted to briefly talk to you about how we fund transit. We're going to have a discussion later today with some of the MPO staff. We have folks from our central office here to talk about how state funding does interrelate to the local transit, to the regional transit. But there's really 3 ways that the state funds transit right now. One is we fund it by providing funding for studies and research. That's kind of what we're doing right now on almost every transit study in the region is funded by FDOT. That comes from that program. Secondly, we have a formula-based grant program, which basically means you get a portion of the pie based on population, and we work with the locals to get that. And then we also have competitive grants, which are generally based on merit that we apply for with others throughout the state. The one last thing I wanted to bring up in regards to Tampa Bay Next is we have gone out to the community. One of the first things that I heard when I came into the position was that we had some properties that we owned. Some of them were in disrepair. Others, the fear was they were going to become in disrepair in the future. We went out to the communities, talked to people, went to the homeowners associations, and asked them, what would you like for us to do regarding these properties? And so we're developing plans. We're moving forward with some of them right now. Others we're trying to figure out how to accomplish. But I think you'll find that the ones that are in really bad shape, that we can't find anybody who may want to purchase those and move them, or that the community says they would like to be taken down. There's some of those that will happen. Others, we're looking for ways to reuse the properties until such time as we determine whether we actually are going to need that property for our final plans or not. And with that, I know there's a lot of information, but that's where we stand on Tampa Bay Next right now. There's a lot of activity going on. There'll continue to be a lot of activity. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to address them.
Any questions? Can't be recognized.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Very informative and a good update. I actually think I would appreciate if we would have Secretary Gwen come back and do a presentation on exactly how the funding from the state works in terms of transit. Because I'd like to know very specifically how, and I hope other board members would too, about exactly how we can look at those grants and most work with those grants. I would have a lot of questions otherwise, but
Yeah.
I'd like a full presentation.
And that's part of the reason that we're here. I guess after this meeting, we'll be meeting with Beth and some of the staff with our folks from Tallahassee who, it is not that easy to understand. I don't understand it all myself. It is somewhat complex in terms of all the different places where money comes from. The one thing I will tell you, though, that that I've learned is a lot of where that money goes on the money that's not formula-based, a lot of it is dependent upon what the local governments are willing to also bring, because it's mostly matching money. And all these studies that we're funding right now, we can spend our money on those. What we typically can't do is say we're going to take the lead on the maintenance and operations. We're not we're not the agency that runs the transit system. We're there as a partner. So I would say that if there are, if there is support moving forward on certain things with the MPO, the county, the city, all of that, the more public support for those moving forward, even if it's prioritizing those projects at the top of your list, those sort of things go a long way in determining where that transit money can go. When we go to the federal level, it's even more important that the local support is there and that it's credible and that we can convince them that they ought to invest that money here in our community.
Mr. Tapano, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to congratulate the Secretary and staff for the amount of outreach that I've seen and sort of pushing the clutch in and taking a breath and see what the community really wants. And your presentation made that very clear today, so kudos for that.
Thank you.
See no further discussions, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan.
Okay, good morning. Scott Pringle with Jacobs Engineering. I'm the project manager for the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. I want to thank the board for giving me the opportunity to provide the update this morning. Quickly, I just want to communicate exactly where we are in the process. We have a 2-year time frame or a 2-year schedule for this effort. We've spent approximately the last year, just over a year, looking at the technical data to develop a draft concept. Starting here and moving forward through the next several months, our schedule is completely focused on vetting that draft concept with the community. So I like to thank all the comments that we've been receiving. We've had a lot of great dialogue, some issues or concerns that have been identified, some we heard today as well as yesterday, and that is exactly what we're supposed to be doing right now. The design of this phase of the project is to listen to those concerns, understand those issues, address them as we finalize the plan, and that's exactly what we're going to do over the next several months. So the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan, my mission was to identify what is the most feasible premium transit project that we can start with today, recognizing that there's still questions out there about how it gets funded and how it gets implemented. The purpose of the plan is to validate that regional vision. And honestly, it's a vision that we've all been talking about for many decades. And it is based upon the Imagine 2040 principles that were established by this board. But a big part of going beyond just identifying that regional vision is how do we get started on that vision? What is that project that we can start with today that'll allow us to grow to meet that future vision, and which includes a number of different projects, both rubber tire and steel wheel. So I just want to emphasize that the plan is, from the onset, this plan was never identified to be just another study for the shelf. It was really designed to figure out what we can feasibly construct here in 2018. This is not a replacement for what the MPO is doing in the long-range transportation plan. However, it does complement what the MPO is doing on their long-range transportation plan. And again, I want to reiterate this again, that the Catalyst project is not designed to replace any of our other needs. We recognize that we have a significant amount of transit, especially premium transit needs in the Tampa Bay area, and this Catalyst project that we've identified is a way to get started towards building that vision. So this is the transit vision I mentioned. This was essentially our first milestone in that year of looking at the data. Again, all the projects here, there's 21 regional premium transit needs identified in this vision. They come from the long-range transportation plans, both Imagine 2040 as well as Pasco and Pinellas' long-range transportation plans, because again, this vision is something that this region has done a really good job in identifying over the past several years, if not past several decades. Our next major milestone in the effort was then taking that vision and starting to look at where the most competitive projects were or corridors were, and more specifically looking at, okay, what can operate on those corridors? What type of transit modes make sense for each corridor? And we looked at a wide variety of transit technologies, from ferries to steel wheel, which includes commuter rail, light rail, and we also looked at rubber tire. Rubber tire includes bus rapid transit, express buses, and we also looked very closely at the future of driverless vehicles. The transportation industry as a whole is moving, we feel, towards this autonomous technology, and the transit industry is as well. So we definitely took a very hard look at how these technologies are going to impact transit in the future. So in our third major milestone, what we were evaluating is essentially 5 alternatives. 2 corridors, which is the I-275 corridor, 2 different modes on that corridor, either rubber tire or an urban rail service. Now, urban rail is something that has close station spacing, and it's a service that comes very frequently, especially during the peak hour, at least every 15 minutes or better. We looked at a second corridor, which is that CSX corridor, and we looked at 3 different modes on that CSX corridor. This connects USF to downtown Tampa. We looked at rubber tire. Again, we looked at urban rail, and we also looked at commuter rail. Now, one of the main purposes of the plan itself was to identify a project, that catalyst project, that could be feasible and also did a really good job of competing for those federal and state grant dollars. So the evaluation criteria that you see listed here, employment, population density, ridership, environmental benefits, and cost effectiveness, are all provided to us through the guidance from the Federal Transit Administration. We applied those objectively to all 5 of those alternatives. And what we found is that the biggest hurdle we were facing was cost. We got a decent amount of ridership along each one of these corridors, but the ridership we were getting was not cost effective. And when you look at how much we would have to pay to move those riders annually. Now, the Federal Transit Administration guidance suggests that you should be at least $10 per trip or better to be a cost-effective project. And you can see here, when we're looking at rubber tire or urban rail in the interstate, specifically something that's in its own lane, potentially in the median, where you need additional right-of-way, new structures, new overpasses, we're talking about extremely high capital costs, ranging from $2 to $5 billion on those two different modes in the interstate. On CSX, same conversation, and you can see the prices there, ranging from $340 million up to $1 billion. And what we recognized in November is that we had an issue. You know, we understood what the ridership was, but we weren't coming in on the cost side. And we really needed to begin thinking differently about these corridors to sort of maximize and reduce our overall project cost and maximize our cost effectiveness. This is our value engineering phase that we've been focused on over the past several months. Now, the best way to start maximizing the potential of each of one of those corridors, simply put, is to look at the existing assets in those corridors. How do you maximize those existing assets? How do you get the best and highest use of what's already out there today? So in the I-275 corridor, the highway is the existing asset. How can we integrate transit into the highway system to lower those overall project costs? Same thing with the CSX corridor. That existing asset that's out there today is the freight rail corridor. How can we use that active freight rail corridor to reduce the project costs along CSX? So what we developed first on the I-275 corridor is a combination of running on the shoulders of the interstate, at times running in the median of the interstate, but looking at ways to have a dedicated transit lane either in the shoulders or in the median, specifically in our most congested portions of the I-275 corridor. Now, this would not require any additional right-of-way. We can actually widen the shoulders and harden the shoulders that are out there today and really take advantage of FDOT's plans for modernizing the interstate to a great benefit of the project itself, dramatically reducing the overall project costs when we're looking at this rubber tire solution on the interstate. We have over 21 stations along this corridor. 19 of them are at grade and in the community. The fact is, this concept is a balance. We understood from the beginning how important it was to have stations that integrate with the local transit system that serve those communities, and that's why we identified that 19 of those stations are at grade. But at the same time, we're looking at providing this regional premium service, and in order to do that, we felt that running on the interstate where you could get higher speeds between those stations was the balance we needed to get a compelling project, a catalyst project, up and running. So I'm going to walk you through each segment of that concept, starting in downtown St. Petersburg. We had the opportunity to use some of the future plans that PSTA is putting forth for a bus rapid transit in downtown, and use the same existing infrastructure, get the circulation in downtown St. Pete. From that point, we can get into those dedicated shoulder running lanes from north of St. Pete up to the greater Gateway area. And it's at that point when we're starting to look at the Howard Franklin Bridge. Again, we have this natural obstacle of the 7-mile bay crossing. And in order to reduce those project costs, instead of proposing a new bridge structure solely for transit, we had the opportunity to partner with the district, with FDOT, to use those toll lanes that they just identified or you discussed earlier. Again, this rubber-tired transit vehicle would be with other traffic, but it'd be in those toll lanes, so it would get some of those speed requirements to get across the bay. And then when we get into the West Shore area, we have the opportunity to use some of those future improvements proposed at State Route 60 to get a dedicated, a direct connection to the airport, to the new consolidated rental car facility, as well as make a connection to the West Shore Intermodal Center, something that FDOT's been looking at for several years. And it's at that point from West Shore to downtown Tampa, we'd be again in a dedicated lane, at this point in the median of the interstate, until we make the connection in downtown Tampa. Now, when we get to downtown Tampa, you heard the Secretary talk about the opportunity to look at Tampa, Florida for a BRT service. Again, just like what is happening in downtown St. Petersburg, what we think is that we can come off the interstate, make a connection to the Intermodal Center, use the one-way pairs of Tampa, Florida to get underneath the downtown interchange, avoid the conflict there, looking to get up to around the Florida-Nebraska area, get back onto the interstate to make that express regional trip north of downtown Tampa up to and past USF area up to the Beers area. And at that point, we could either continue to have a conversation about shoulder running from Beers up to Wesley Chapel. But again, I do want to recognize that we wanted to be very thoughtful with the cost and how cost effective it is we can make this project. And we don't see a significant amount of congestion, even during peak hours in that portion of the interstate. So there is an opportunity to reduce costs by being in traffic. But again, when we get to the Wesley Chapel area, to get to State Route 54, it's really important because there's a lot of congestion at those interchanges to, again, investigate the idea of running on the shoulders, bypass that congestion to make those connections. Again, you can see some of the stations here, and I will reiterate, all these stations are designed to be at street level, to be an anchor in each one of those neighborhoods. So by developing this concept of working with the shoulders and working with the roadway plans to the benefit of transit, we're able to reduce that $2.3 to $2.9 billion project down to a $380 million to a $455 million project, which is a significant cost savings. The federal program, you would anticipate that 50% of the overall project costs would be covered by the FTA grant program with those matching dollars that the Secretary just mentioned of 25 and 25 to local and state. You can see the breakdown here. The operating plan for this 41-mile corridor for that rubber tire service would be about $7 million per year, which would primarily fall on the local operating entity to fund and move forward. Now, we took the same exact approach to the CSX corridor. and we looked at that connection from USF to downtown Tampa. Instead of double tracking the entire corridor, what we looked at is refurbishing the track that's already out there, that active freight corridor, looking at adding sidings to make sure that we have the opportunity for quick trips and frequent trips along the corridor. And most importantly, we looked at transit vehicle technology that's been accepted by the Federal Rail Administration to be have the safety compliance required to operate in an active freight corridor. And by doing that, again, we're able to reduce the overall project cost, sort of value engineer that concept, reducing it from the $800 million to $800 to $1 billion project down to a $490 million to a $620 million project. Again, these are those breakdowns, that 50, 25, 25 split. The difference here is the annual operations for that type of vehicle would be $12 million for the 9 miles of the CSX corridor as compared to the $7 million for the 41 miles. So we wanted to move forward and start, where can we start on that vision? What is that catalyst project? And what we found is that by doing this value engineering exercise, we had the ability to make both of those projects competitive for federal funds, both the CSX corridor as well as rubber tire on the interstate. You can see the cost per trip that we're significantly closer to that FTA guidance and those overall project costs. And the time construct, approximately working with the department, I think the I-275 rubber tire concept will be something that you could get up and running quicker than you would the CSX corridor, singly because we still have to work with CSX to identify whether we can own or lease that portion of the corridor for use of this passenger rail service. Again, some more statistics. When you look at that capital cost in today's dollars and calculate it per mile, the 41 miles of shoulder running on the I-275 corridor is between 9 and 11 million per mile as compared to the 54 to 68 million per mile on the CSX corridor. So some of the things we're really focused on is, and some of the comments we've heard is, we're looking at this rubber tire service, and what we're hearing from the community already is how important it is that we have those conveniences to get people from A to B, and that is definitely something that we're very focused on. We want to make sure that we're providing convenience for those riders to have a fast trip, to get those long distances quickly. We also want to make sure that we're providing those passenger amenities that would be attractive, especially for a catalyst project, to this corridor. Most importantly, bypassing congestion where we know that congestion exists by either using those shoulder running concepts or the median itself, which allows us to reduce the overall project cost and invest in stations. We're going to start talking a lot more about the cost and all the elements in that cost, that $455 million project cost. And what you're going to find is the majority of that cost is actually being spent on stations, because we recognize how important it is for those connections to the community. And again, we're not talking about your local bus where there's just a bench and a sign. We're talking about robust station facilities that have amenities to attract and be really an anchor or a central point for these communities. And again, we're also have this ability to take that funding and invest in the future. And the flexibility of using rubber tire and its adaptability when these future technologies come online cannot be understated. And we have the opportunity to look at moving those funds to make sure that we have power systems in place for electric vehicles and the communication systems in place that you would need to run driverless vehicles in the future. But we recognize that it's absolutely critical that this becomes a part of that network, that regional system that the Secretary just talked about, and connecting to a number of different ongoing activities throughout our region, ranging all the way from St. Pete up to State Route 54, 56 in Pasco County. So again, we're going to start our community vetting process here and really listen to the concerns and issues through the rest of spring into the summer timeframe. Take all that input, and we're going to refine this draft concept for that summer-fall timeframe and finalize that in fall. At this point, Chair, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation. Commissioner White, you're recognized.
Thank you, and I believe your last slide answers my question. The HART board yesterday took a vote to leave its staff on the sidelines, but Jacobs is most definitely going to move forward with the public outreach portion of this. Great. And I mean, I'm certain I know the answer to this question as well, but as funding strategies begin to come into focus, there would be nothing that would preclude stakeholder agencies from doing their own public outreach at that point, correct?
Absolutely not.
Great. Well, this is the second time I've seen this presentation. As I said
In
at
24
yesterday's,
hours.
yeah, within 24 hours. As I said yesterday, I think this merits the study process that it's going through. I continue to believe that it's appropriate for stakeholder agencies to leave their staffs on the sidelines at this point, but I think it's great that you as the vendor are moving forward with the public outreach, and I look forward to seeing where we go from here. For me, the devil's going to be in the details of a funding strategy, subject to what we find out in public outreach, but I appreciate your hard work and everything that you put into this.
Thank you.
Mr. Kemp, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm on the transportation management, the 3 MPOs combined, T-BARTA, HART, MPO. At the T-BARTA meeting a few weeks ago for the region, I was the only one who voted against this project. And I've looked at the project. I've actually seen this show like 5 times, besides the times I've studied it myself, along with more depth information. I wanted to make, and yesterday our board, as Commissioner White said, voted, I took it as a vote of kind of non-endorsement at the HART board about moving forward on this. I wanted everyone here to know, and I've got copies and I'll pass them out to you, that this is the editorial from the Tampa Bay Times that said that this was not the project that we should be moving forward on. Tampa Bay needs real mass transit, not just marketing. Also, last week, the Tampa Bay Business Journal also weighed in, and they said, and I'll pass these out to everyone, affordable BRT isn't the answer to Tampa Bay's transit woes. And I really urge you to read these and think about this. I think we need to really be thinking about how we want to make major investments, and especially in Hillsborough County. This is our backyard. Most of this project is in our backyard. Very little of it is in Pinellas, very little in Pasco. We are the major land use part of this. And land use, to my disappointment, transit-oriented development, economic development have not been woven into this study. As a newer commissioner and one who has not seen this process before, I was kind of taken aback and shocked by the fact that that wasn't an integrated part of this. Within the study, they talked about ROI, and so I started return on investment. I started saying, well, what's our return on investment? And I had seen many studies from around the country where they talked about return on investment. When they talked about return on investment, they talked about what happens in communities, like you heard this morning, the Health Line, the 11-mile Cleveland line, where they invested $200 million and they got $6.3 million in economic development. I'm sorry, $6.3 billion in economic development in that area. That's the kind of tax base, that's the kind of quality of life and quality community that you can build around stops that are integrated at street level for BRT. I think it's a huge mistake to be thinking about this, which isn't really a BRT system, it's more an express bus system, but to be thinking about making that kind of investment in an on the interstate type of system. We do have and should have more express bus service, and we have already looking at that yesterday at HART from Wesley Chapel through 275 to downtown. And in fact, actually, they engineered designed the express bus service, so it will actually go through the university area down Bruce B. Downs, which was always meant to be a BRT, and where it would actually serve people and pick up passengers. I think we need to look at how we move through Hillsborough County with a BRT at street level that builds our communities, that builds our economic development, and that gives us transit-oriented development, as they've done all over the country. I found a bevy of studies where the ULI has been involved and told them, take it off the interstate, move it into the communities. And in the meantime, we can, or also as a supplement, do more express bus service on the interstates without the stops, without the investment in the stops, but at grade with very few stops to move traffic through. I saw this study actually as being an incredible testament, and I'll pass these out to you also, as being an incredible testament to the strength of the CSX corridor for putting in a transit system. I was kind of taken aback when I saw the final product of this, that somehow they were comparing, I still will never understand this in any way, a 9-mile corridor to a 41-mile corridor. Why wouldn't you compare apples to apples? You either compare a 9-mile interstate corridor to the 9-mile CSX and tell us the values, or you compare a 42-mile, whatever you want, corridor of BRT at grade or rail to this 42-mile interstate corridor to try to find your best answers and best values. If you look at this, and simply in the 9-mile corridor of the CSX, it's kind of amazing, is it gives you 9 miles compared to 41. You get 3.3 million riders on the CSX and 1.5 million new riders on the CSX 9-mile corridor. Compare that to the 41-mile corridor, where you have 3.6 million riders, so just slightly more than 41 miles, slightly more than the, oh good, that's up there, thank you, than the CSX corridor, and you get fewer new riders on a 41-mile corridor than this. It's pretty amazing. The other thing, on the 9-mile corridor of CSX in Hillsborough County, we have more than half the jobs of the 41-mile corridor. We also have more than half the population on the 9-mile corridor of the 41-mile corridor. I think this is a real testament to the CSX being a really wonderful option in the investment that we should be moving forward here in Hillsborough County, since we'll have to invest our local dollars. In terms of the region, I think it makes way more sense to invest in the express buses and to connect up. I also think Pinellas would do better to look at, the Gateway connection, but also 4th Street as a street at grade or street level type of BRT system. What we've seen here is the same thing we've been looking at for years, and this is not gold standard BRT. It's really just Express Bus Plus, operating in mixed traffic in many cases. It's not congestion proof. The CSX would be. Other BRT at street level can be. Express buses are fine, but this simply isn't the transformative project we need now. Beyond that, this fails to do the most critical thing we need is a catalyst for a public transit project. It fails to support land use objectives and to support the region's economy and quality of life. Major transit investment should be a catalyst for residential and commercial development, walkable, livable neighborhoods along the corridor served by congestion-free premium transit. A short walk from your home or business, that would really change things. And we just cannot accomplish this with this corridor. It's too vast. It divides the environments adjacent to it, hindering walkability and bikeability. The interstate is not the place for a transformative public project that we need. The exercise has highlighted some things, as I said, the value of CSX, the fact that it's too expensive to put a rail line across the bridge connecting the two counties. But I think we really need to look more closely at our opportunities for Hillsborough County and what we can do best to serve the citizens here and create the best transit and connectivity and economic development.
Before I call on Mayor Lott, let me make one thing perfectly clear. We're not going to take any action on this today. This is just a presentation. To make other thing perfectly clear, the vote yesterday by Hart Board was not an endorsement or non-endorsement of this plan. It was just to say our staff will be on the sidelines as they carry forth, the consultant carry forth this community outreach to the community. Mayor Lott, you recognize.
Okay, I hope this is seen as a negative comment, because I'm not being negative in any way, but at least I hope I'm trying to phrase this where it doesn't come across that way. But we, over the years, have had many plans. We've built many plans. We've come up with all kinds of solutions. But at the end of the day, and I love seeing the passion. I love seeing everyone trying to rally around a program here. But at the end of the day, it takes the county commission to make this hard decision. And we can be here another 14 or 15 years discussing our plans, but until the county commission finds the resolve to get behind a plan, which is a hard decision, we're still going to be sitting here looking at pieces of paper with drawings on them, talking about numbers. And and I don't mean that as a slant. I'm not knocking the county commission. I appreciate the leadership that you provide, and I think we have a very strong county commission. But you know, I look at programs like this. I'm going, okay, if the county commission can't get behind one of these programs, nothing's ever going to get forward. The last time we had an initiative, and I thought it was a great initiative. We spent over 2 years on it. You had 100% of the 3 cities behind the plan. And in my own city, a city is about as conservative as you can get. You had our EDC, our Chamber of Commerce. You had every organization 100% behind the referendum, and we still couldn't push that referendum forward, okay? And so my comment here is that I love hearing the passion that I'm hearing from our county commissioners here. I hope this continues, because I really do hope that the county commission can get behind one of these plans, okay, and push it forward, because the 3 cities are all at the mercy of the leadership of the county. And how, from Plant City, any way we can support you in getting behind one of these plans, we would love to have that conversation with you. But I sure would like to see the county push forward something that we can all approve. So,
Well said, man.
And hopefully that was not seen as a negative comment.
Well said.
Okay,
Well
thank
said.
you.
Mr. Lopano, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Pull your mic down, sir. Pull your mic down.
Thank you. Yeah, so from the airport standpoint, we got to do something fast. I mean, we've more than doubled our international passengers coming in, and we bring them in at about 500 miles an hour, and then they land and they stop. So we got to do something. Something has to be done. This is one piece of a puzzle. I think the secretary laid out, I heard 5 or 6 different ideas of things that can connect and work with each other. There's no silver bullet, and the press said this is not the answer to our problems. Well, no single thing is ever the answer. I think the answer is something like streetcars. I think the answer is something like steel wheel. I think the answer is largely rubber wheel. The airport started rubber wheel transit in 1970, and we just now are going to be opening in a couple of days a 1.4 mile rubber wheel transit system that's going to connect the rental car center and carry millions of people to the main terminal. So I think the answer is not steel or rubber or just one thing. I think the answer is many. But I have a question. The commissioner was talking about that the stations should be at grade. Didn't you say that a lot of them are at grade? What was the number?
19 of 21.
And did you factor in your study how many people live within a quarter mile or 5-minute walking distance from there?
The FTA guidance, we actually look at a half mile.
Half mile. So you factored all that in for your ridership?
Correct.
So communities would be able to walk to these stations. Is that correct?
Correct.
So anyway, I just hope that, and I echo the mayor's sentiment, I hope we get the backbone and the nerve to start doing something. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sir, thank you. Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Thank you. I just like to respond a little.
We're not getting into debate with this.
No, I'm not trying to get into
No
debate. I just like to answer some of the concerns. Again, I just would like to say that this isn't mode-centered. It's not about a rubber tire versus steel, anything like that. It's really about what serves best our community in terms of economic development and transit-oriented development with at-grade, which is really best practices, and we can find that out across the country. And if we connect at-grade BRT, doesn't have to be steel, doesn't have to, but that if we do the exact same connections through the communities, and from downtown to West Shore, certainly a parallel system, maybe on something like Cypress and Maine, which I think has been studied before, for a BRT with actual stops that get involved in street level and pick up people. We can eliminate a lot of these stops on this system and use the express bus to connect us up in a fast way, and using the 275 corridor for that. But I really don't think we should be investing in extra stations. We can pull off at the places we need. We don't have to create this kind of investment. We move this investment to BRT at street grade to do the same job.
Mr. Pringle, could you go back to the slide where you're scheduled for community engagement? Okay. You will have incorporated public comment to finalize plan by the fall of 2018.
That's correct.
Will you be coming back to this body to present what those comments were during those?
Several times, I hope.
Okay. Because everything could, I should say everything, a lot could change by that time you
Yes.
come back. We could not be talking about everything above grade. We could be talking about at grade, depending on what the public says. Am I correct?
Right.
See you then.
Thank you.
Second Director's report.
Thank you, sir.
I looked it up.
Last month, I brought up the idea of having a strategic planning retreat for this board with the appointed planning commissioners that are appointed by each of your local governments, and using that as an opportunity to focus on where do we need to focus our attention in our comprehensive and our long-range planning to address growth and revitalization and mobility for everyone. So the topic is, what do we, as a group, need to focus on most in the next few years? And so the date for that, we did move the date to accommodate, I think the city of Tampa was not available on the date I suggested last month. So we have moved that to Friday, March the 23rd, noon to 5. That will be a facilitated workshop, and our location is going to be Stetson Law Center. So we should have that to your offices. I'll double check on that. There is a legislative update in your addendum from the MPO Advisory Council. The MPOAC did meet last week. You were represented by Mr. Klug. We talked a bit about the Freight Committee for the MPOs of the state, which is going to be making a recommendation this spring to FDOT about significant freight projects, and we'll be coordinating closely on that about advancing our next set of projects. One item that came up under committee reports, the Livable Roadways Committee did make a motion about a bill about dockless bike sharing. The concern is about restricting local government's ability to regulate the placement of facilities. It could be an issue with your sidewalks complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act. There was an amendment yesterday to one of the two bills, and if you all are in agreement with this, I would like to ask you to allow me to have a conversation with the sponsors of this bill. The sponsors are Representative Toledo and Senator Young, and to bring up with them verbally what the concerns are that have been raised by the local governments. Any concerns about that approach? Okay. And also in your addendum, there is the commuter challenge flyer. We are inviting all of our board members to join with us in taking an alternative mode of transportation other than driving alone during the week of February 19th through 23rd. If you'd like to participate, please let me know so that we can include you in the announcements. And we are also closing in on our Gulf Coast Safe Street Summit. Registration is going to close a week from today. So last call on that. Thank you so much.
Okay, any old business? Any new business? Any monkey business? Seeing none, we adjourn.
Just
Good morning. My name is Brandon Self. I am covering for Ms. Holt here for the County Public Safety Coordinating Council meeting. She apologizes for her absence. She had to be over in court this morning. We will call the meeting to order this morning at 8:31 a.m. Still on the wrong time period. We will go into roll call.
Ms. Holt,
Brandon Self on behalf of Ms. Holt.
Sheriff Cronister, Chief Judge Figueroa,
Gina Justice, Court Administrator for Chief Judge.
Andrew Warren,
Renee